Playing Remnant 2 for me is like being Daniel Radcliffe in Guns Akimbo. Guns were forced upon me, but really I would prefer a path of non-violence and light trolling. Luckily, the mad designers at Gunfire Games gave me the perfect accessory for exactly this situation. See, there's an amulet called the Toxic Release Valve that can fundamentally change the game you're playing, from a shooter into a dodger? Toxic Release Valve expels a cloud of acid when you swap between your two guns. It also leaves a potent damage over time effect on enemies hit. For my first Remnant 2 challenge run, I'm going to try to beat the entire campaign, including all bosses, events, and aberrations, using nothing but these fart clouds. A fart cloud deals 143 acid damage, which is not much, within 7 meters, which is pretty close up, and it applies corrosion, which ticks for 20-ish damage twice a second for 7 seconds. That's about twice as much damage through the dot effect as burst damage, but the dot does not stack. So as long as we're farting at least once every 7 seconds, the dot has 100% uptime. Therefore, we're better focused on maximizing the instantaneous ass blast damage. That's quite hard to do because there are many things that a fart is not. It is neither ranged nor melee damage and can't be affected by boosts to either. It's weirdly not an explosion and can't be boosted by the blasting cap ring. Farts cannot hit weak points. Farts are neither a mod nor a skill and cannot be affected by damage, cast speed, or cooldown reduction for any of those. Neither haste nor weapon swap speed help us either, since the fart is instantaneous at the beginning of the swap animation. And farts have a hard 3-second cooldown which cannot be reduced by anything. But a fart is acid damage, and it is elemental damage, and it is boosted by anything that says, quote, all damage. So the rings for this run are going to focus on those damage types. Alumni Ring, for us, says do 10% more damage. So does Acid Stone. Burden of the Destroyer should be a slam dunk. It increases all damage by 15% at a price of decreasing firearm ideal range by 25%. Now that downside is blank for us, so this ring should be a strict 15% boost. However, this ring is an extremely rare random item that Cass has a chance to stock in her store once every 30 minutes, and it just never happened for me yet, so that's sadly out. But behold my unexpected tech. Farts can score critical hits. And I do own a similar downside that's not a downside ring, the Burden of the Gambler. It disables weak spots, which we don't care about, in trade for increasing crit chance by 10% and crit damage by 20%. And as a consequence of our higher crit chance, Probability Cord now makes sense as our fourth ring to increase our crit damage by a further 30%. For anyone curious, farts also charge mod power and trigger lifesteal effects, but that doesn't affect our damage. For Relic, I'm going Tranquil Heart, which provides passive HP regen without having to actually use your healing item. Now, Relic Fragments have some variants. One slot is clearly locked down to 10% elemental damage. That's a slam dunk. But no other fragments boost farts, so the other 2 slots should go towards survivability. I like damage resist and health, but these could also have gone to armor, consumable duration, or even skill cooldown. Archetypes for this run had a couple of options. Alchemist and Medic both come with 25% boosts to all damage and 5% crit chance, so those are looking good. Alchemist increases our concoction limit, whereas Medic has a little gray health synergy and the active shield skill that I personally really enjoy, so I took Medic as my off class. Our primary archetype is not a close race though. Challenger clearly eats the most beans of any archetype in the game. It comes with a hooking 35% damage bonus to enemies within 10 meters, and everything we fart on is going to be within 10 meters. Plus, it comes with a free Oopsie Daisy once every 10 minutes, and its Juggernaut active ability also gives some move speed bonus for navigating the big levels. For traits, Amplitude boosts the fart radius from 7 meters to 10.5 meters, which is clearly mandatory. Then, everything else is just for survivability. I took Damage Reduction, Regen, Gray Health Regen, Lifesteal, Evade Window, and Flat Health. Concoctions give us a few choices. Gray Health Regen has some synergy with Medic archetype. Regular regen is always good, and flat health helps us take more damage in succession while also scaling with the Medic shield skill. I'll play with all 3 of these during the run. Now, I could say a lot about my guns, mods, and mutators, but really all that matters is you know this. One gun has a non-damaging mod that stuns or slows enemies if they can't be stunned, and the other gun has a non-damaging healing mod, but its mutator slows nearby enemies when I use the healing mod. So just know that both of my guns are capable of inflicting slow on enemies without actually shooting them for damage. That's all about my build. So as we start the run now, a quick promo. If you enjoy the content, please sprinkle a like, comment, or sub. It helps me a great deal when y'all support my channel like that by showing the algo that I did a good job. Thank you, friends. Let's get this run going. I decided Phelan or Farron looked pretty difficult to kill with fart damage, so I chose to roll a Losomn with Morrow Parish to kick off the run. Approached some Dran trash to test out the fart damage, and I'm quite pleased. They're dying to 1 toot plus the corrosion effect, or 2 toots if I stick around. But once I realized I don't need to babysit corpses for ammo pickups to drop since I don't need ammo, I got comfortable passing gas in passing against trash and leaving them to die in my malodorous wake. What's also nice is that a fart has stagger damage, so if enemies were in the midst of attacking, a fart stops them in their tracks. Now, most mobs are dead to the dot by the time that they initiate another attack. There is a relic fragment that boosts stagger damage that I didn't feel the need to toy with, but maybe that has merit if there are bosses that can stagger. Drea/Barghest is the first event in Harvester's Reach for me. Knocking all the slimes off of a bone pile at once with a single fart was very fun to do. The werewolves inside the bone piles were my first non-trivial enemy to encounter this run, and they gave me quite a workout until I remembered to slow them. At that point, they're like a Dark Souls 2 boss, and I can literally just walk strafe behind them in perfect safety as I toot. Barghest the Aberration was easy too, but at one point, he teleported so far away that he dropped aggro and I had to go scour the level to restart the fight. And that's our first challenge complete. So far, so good. Our first proper boss came soon thereafter, it's Bloat King, and he came with elemental resist affix, which sucks. This fight was quite a slog, as I first tried to chase down his spheres to damage them, but it became much steadier once I realized that the boss is within my fallout zone if I just stand directly below him and let loose on cooldown. Next, I got the Lamarck district for a clock piece, and we moved on. I met my first Father Gascoigne enemy, whom I slowed and brutalized. Let me use this fight to point something out. So, you can see he's slowed permanently, and I'm pretty sure that's a bug. The slow effects from both my mod and mutator slow methods claim to be temporary in the descriptions, yet for this whole run, any enemy who's susceptible to slow was actually slowed permanently when I used either of these effects. Remnant 2 is a new game from a small team, and it's constantly getting updates, so this will likely be patched. But in the meantime, I'm not looking a gift horse in the mouth. Infinite slow is fine by me. It doesn't work on any real bosses, so it's not like the upside is that high. I make it to the asylum and notice a fun trick. As I was farting around the ground floor, the gas was permeating the floorboards and taking out the orange slimes who live in the basement. When I got down there, most of them were already dead. If more of the game took place in multi-level areas like this, farts would do a lot of work. In the front yard, there's a Ripsaw aberration who did resist slow, but his attacks are easily dodgeable and we took him down. Then, through the fancy door, Numue is the first one to speak up about our lack of bowel control.
The scent is as strong on you as it was on him.
Then she gets rid of us to the Fey Realm. This Executioner fight in the Forsaken Quarter was scary, but Permaslow kept us safe, and he helped a little bit too by walking into his own fire. Then this mini Delane turned out to be corrosion immune, making me really hope we don't get the full boss version later. We defeated it with just the immediate blast damage and a little line of sight shenanigans from the environment. I wasn't happy to see the feast event on this run, since I didn't know if it would somehow punish my weird build. But the delectable foods on the banquet table were releasing their own delightful stench clouds so invitingly I just had to cut the cheese and dig in. Turns out it was fine. These 2 mini Delanes slowed down my progress a little, but otherwise we had nothing to worry about. My next event was Tiller's Rest, that sewer where you just have to survive against hordes of trash while 3 doors open very slowly. Hordes of trash is our strong point, so I was living my best life here. Funny, thanks to our very low DPS, the final mini-boss guy took so long to kill that the gate would have been safe to go through way before he died, but I hung around to see it through. In the Gilded Chambers, they kept throwing Pontiff Sullivans at me, so I knew a Red Prince fight was coming. I did accumulate 3 coins, but ain't no way I'm turning down a fight. Now, this guy curses you, so I swapped out a 10% ring for curse immunity and went in cheeks blazing. This is my second time ever encountering him, so my fight was a little messy, but Farts handled his clones very efficiently, and we got him in one try. Now back to the asylum, it's time to challenge the Nightweaver, the world boss of Losomn, who will mark the 25% point of the run. And she finally served us our first death in Phase 2 with some extreme burst damage. I got her second try with the help of a Challenger Oopsie Daisy self-res. There's not much strategy to note, except that obviously her spider summons were a complete non-entity. And that's our first biome complete. 1/4 of the run is under my belt, and I'm starting to believe this build has legs. Now the Labyrinth is a sort of intermission biome. There's a certain worrisome Labyrinth boss coming soon, but before that, I discovered the Labyrinth enemies are completely ruined by my strategy. The armored spheres, which are usually so tough to damage, are easier than ever. Fart clouds can't hit their weak spot, but in turn, they can't hit their strong spots either, if that makes sense. And the huge stompy guys, like this Bastion aberration, have surprisingly flimsy health when you're not trying to hit a bullseye. Farts and some slow easily carried me through the sphere survival event. Then, all that remained was Labyrinth Sentinel. This is a puzzle boss with a non-traditional health pool, where you are forced to shoot the faces off of tumbling cubes. It's the one time we weren't allowed to win with farts. I await your disapproving comments, but there's not much else to say here. I'm on the edge of my seat now as we roll our second biome, hoping not to get stuck with a Shahala fight. I'm thrilled to land in Forgotten Prison, which means we get to fight Talratha, who doesn't have any ultra long-range nonsense as long as we fight his corporeal form. Let's just check the damage quick against drones. Oh! That is quite acceptable. Thank you. Flying enemies in theory are problematic for a fart build with limited range, but 10 meters is more than enough to cover the Z distance as long as I'm near them on the XY plane. I do discover that I'm vulnerable when multiple drones attack from separate faraway directions, and I die. Going forward, I learned to actively destroy stray drones I see in case they would tack on to big fights later, and I tried to fight with canyon walls nearby to limit their mobility options. Laser eyes have some massive damage output, but I discovered their perfect counter is just rushing them and standing below. Zombies die in one fart, though they have a bit more health and they need the dot damage. Then it's time for my first Narud dungeon, the Dark Conduit. This robot with many ads is our boss, but as you know, farts are great for clearing the room. WD-109 itself has quite a lot of health and damage though, and I suffer an oopsie daisy before winning. That encounter inspired me to change my concoction strategy, and you'll see I start to use flat health in an effort to survive more 2-hit combos. We reach the Putrid Domain and fight Abomination for the next 30 minutes. Yeah. Let's talk about difficulty in Remnant 2. I did this run on Nightmare difficulty, which is the second highest, as opposed to Apocalypse, which is highest. There are a variety of reasons for this, both practical and logistical. Primarily is affixes, so all bosses in Remnant 2 have one or more of these Diablo-style affixes. They're traits that change the fight. For example, bosses with Vortex will draw the players into them like a magnet, and bosses with Shocking will cause occasional lightning bolts in the vicinity. Well, one of these traits is Elemental Resist, which decreases their damage taken from my entirely acid element build by as much as 75%. Another one of those traits is Regenerator, which continuously restores the boss's hit points. With the amount of hit points bosses have on Apocalypse, these two traits showing up in concert on any boss could straight up kill the run. You see how slowly we're making progress on this Abomination, even in Nightmare. My damage would be even lower than it is here, likely even impossible to outdamage the regen, since you need to tie up 2 or more of your ring slots on Apocalypse for survivability just to avoid being one-shotted by everything. Frankly, even if we avoid those two affixes showing up together, I'm not sure I have the hard drive space for multiple hour-long HD boss fights. Then there's the fact that Apocalypse runs are more about getting through it than really exploring all of the content. I'd be incentivized to skip as much content as possible, and the video would boil down to me dodge rolling through the 4 world bosses for like an hour apiece at 10x speed. So instead of that, which seems kind of boring, if not impossible, I decided on a Nightmare difficulty for the challenge run, and to make it interesting, I fully cleared the campaign, including all optional bosses, events, and aberrations. It's a judgment call I made for the content. Do let me know if you agree or disagree with this. It's not the last time it will come up, considering some future challenges I also have planned. Phew. Eon Vault has the Restless Spirit aberration, who barely does anything, like even on regular runs. This time is no different. The Custodian's Eye is another proper boss, and this is only my second time encountering it. This ended up being my hardest boss outside of the final boss. Gravity was one risk, having to stand pretty close to the edge for fart range on the boss. The orange laser became my favorite attack since it was easily eye-frameable, while the purple laser could down me in as few as 2 ticks if I just stand wrong. The great news is, for both of the attacks where the floor drops out, he moves above us and is still in fart range, so it's free damage as we calmly walk out of the danger zones. It's the blue missile attack he gains at 50% that ruined me. You have about half a second to roll to cover once the light turns blue, and by standing so far forward for farts, you can get screwed if none of the pillars are convenient. I solved this one by learning to play reactively. He doesn't repeat colors consecutively, so I ran up to break wind only after a blue phase. That did the trick. In the dormant facility, you usually have a choice between exterminating all of the parasites within 6 minutes or firing up a purge. Well, the purge gives you an optional aberration to fight, so of course that's what we do. SDOA7 crumpled to line of sight shenanigans and being stuck in a closed room with me. We got the Soul Spark cylinder soon, so it's time to fight our second world boss. Now, I had only ever fought Covetous Demon once before, so this took some learning. I decided staying in his face is optimal. It discourages his charge attack, and I found it easier to dodge the purple missile barrages when you make them curve back around to reach you. I died once to a roll, once to a missile attack, and got there on try 3. That's 2 biomes complete, and we're halfway through the run. I'm quite happy how that turned out, and there's no Narud boss I would rather face. It's time to roll our Yaesha boss, and this one matters the least on how we roll it since I don't expect either world boss to be particularly problematic against farts. We end up on a Ravager storyline, which I'm slightly less into. Root beasts in Yaesha die to 1 fart, but they need most of the dot to tick. They're the healthiest small foe we've encountered yet. Against the flying mind enemies though, farts are great. They don't have many hit points, and the blue ones who tried teleporting behind me get very punished. Root Nexus / Defiler is our first Yaesha boss. It has surprisingly few hit points compared to the freestanding round version of the Root Nexus, and the adds are so easy to handle as they trickle in thanks to my low damage. The NPC caught in the root spent the whole fight begging me to please start attacking the boss, even though I was tearing through its health the whole time with farts. It seems like certain things in Remnant 2 are scripted to trigger specifically when a character attacks, not necessarily when they deal damage. Let this be foreshadowing for later in a big way. Once the Nexus is dead, the Defiler is no challenge. Next boss is Mother Mind, and it's my first time ever encountering this boss. Remnant 2 just be like that. I die when it collapses the platform underneath me, but otherwise she's easy to learn. Claws swiping me toward her is scary when I'm already near the edge, though. I was worried she would destroy all the platforms before I could get enough damage through, since I was down to the last platform with over 50% health to go, but she kindly leaves the final platform intact while we do our duty. Hey, you can fart down Blood Moon Essence. In Faithless Thicket, we finally encounter those meatball enemies, and predictably, they are very easy foes for a farter. I found it kind of darkly hilarious, too. If you do a fart near one of these flocks of crows, they all croak at once, and the sound is absolutely horrifying. The Wither aberration could have been a huge problem for us. Our target is not this tree trunk enemy, but in fact the little squid who pops out of it when we kill the tree trunk. If we don't kill it in time, it will raise up another beefy husk to possess, and our damage is not enough to kill it in time. It's close, though. After living through multiple respawns, I decided my out was to score some lucky critical hits while it was exposed. Mid-fight, I pivoted one of my 10% rings into the Akari Warband, which buffs crits for 15 seconds after perfect dodging. I intentionally triggered that bonus when the tree was close to death, then with a huge crit, I barely killed Wither before it could revive for a third time. This one would have been impossible on Apocalypse. We also got the Coffin event in this area that leads us to the Rot aberration. This guy was by far the toughest non-boss fight we faced. Between his throws, explosions, and shocking affix, this fight really tested my stamina and health. By this point, I'm like, how am I still finding new Yaesha dungeons? But we are. Shrewd is up next. He was a little tough to close the distance on, but as we all know, eggs make for powerful farts, so his ads phase was completely blank, and we got this one first try. Our reward is yet another Yaesha dungeon. I think this biome ended up being as long as the other two combined, since the overworld areas were huge as well. I was excited to play the chimney with farts to easily clear the trash mobs. Unfortunately, farts cannot touch crystals, so I have to time my progress here carefully like Frogger. This event does force us to shoot a few times to clear the root nodules to win, so it leaves a bad taste in my mouth, but we succeed in one try anyway. We're finally done with the Yaesha dungeons, and we make it to the lever to start the water wheel, and all of a sudden we're up to the Yaesha world boss, the Ravager. Or the dough, but not really the dough. I actually need the dough rewards still, but that wouldn't be in the spirit of the run since that skips this fight. Plus, technically, I can't damage either creature with farts until combat begins, and I can only trigger combat by shooting them or healing the doe, so I heal the doe and kick off a Ravager fight. He has one attack that summons meatball enemies, which was totally blank, and I also loved seeing his Vortex move, which was good for several free toots from us. This fight gets really annoying below 40% health, though. He gains a massive AoE Howl explosion that you have to sprint out of to outdistance, then charges back at you to close the distance. Rinse and repeat. Because he had Regenerator, I played it a little riskier on the Howl timing to sneak some extra farts in and maintain progress, but this phase was tedious. I died once early learning his moves, but we got him on attempt 2 without even using a down. And that's 3 biome bosses down. We're up to Root Earth now, the 4th and final biome, whose bosses and events are not randomized, so I know exactly what I'll be facing. I have particular concerns against Venom and the final boss. But first, I discovered the trash enemies here are the weakest anywhere. They straight up die to 1 fart blast. No crit needed, and not even any ticks of the dot. The artillery dogs and burrowing dogs take 2 or 3 apiece. This flower enemy is our first elite, and the fight is a little touchy until I remember to slow it, then it becomes very easy. Root Earth's first event is this train yard. We have to survive for a few waves of trash enemies, a Scyther flower, and a mini test Venom. Now, normally Venom takes much reduced damage to anywhere that's not his weak spot. But I'm happy to learn that he's like those stone spheres from the Labyrinth, and farts don't even play that game, meaning they get surprisingly good DPS against this enemy. Cancer is the next boss, whom I always found intuitive. I did die once from panic rolling during his melee combo, but we get him on try 2 with an oopsie daisy. The Corrupted Harbor map has a mini-boss version of Cancer, who is susceptible to slow, and thus he's utterly sad. This big chamber with 2 tripods and a Venom has enough chaos that I suffer a down from an artillery dog actually, but once I kill the Venom I can focus on the tripods. They go down pretty fast as a group since farts can affect them both at once, unlike most guns. Now what's this event called? The Cozy Red Room? This was like taking candy from a baby. The 2 Scyther flowers coming out at once is the only time in the game that I was actually pressed to apply slow more than once in a row, so overall we probably could have gotten away with only one of our 2 slow methods. Next up is this optional Bane aberration. He starts with a Venom summoned and summons another at 50%, so you're encouraged to actually kill Bane slowly and handle his ads first. As we know by now, farts are overpowered against Venoms, and then Bane himself is a pretty calm kill. With half of Root Earth now done, I'm becoming gently excited that the final boss may not be so bad. Before that, it's time for actual factual boss version of Venom. This is normally a challenging fight, and I have to leave for a class in 24 minutes, so imagine my surprise when I wander in and effortlessly first try him with time to spare. It's thanks to some mega cheese. We're talking bigger than a Parmesan wheel. This is not the first time I was able to abuse the environment, but it was the most egregious. These cable spools just turn off about 80% of Venom's moves while still keeping him within my fart radius as we dance around it. He does down me once to a dirty trick of his own though, so he leaves these damaging zones around the battlefield that you get very punished for entering. Well, it turns out these zones affect their entire vertical column, and he landed one on top of the obstacle that I didn't see, so I walked straight into its invisible AoE as I circled around. Having learned that, the rest of the fight is cake. And that just leaves our 2-phase final boss, Annihilation. I was so worried for this, I put it off like homework. Now, I actually got pretty good at his moveset from helping friends, and while I can't beat him hitless, I do understand how to avoid and counter each of his moves. I made some light build changes before going in. If you search Toxic Release Valve, you'll see many people discussing Timekeeper's Jewel, which doubles the duration of our corrosion dot effect from 7 to 14 seconds. But that is a fallacy for 95% of toxic fights, since you'll have 100% uptime on corrosion even at 7-second duration. The final boss finally breaks that trend though. There are periods where he flies up high and idles for quite a while before resuming attacks. For the only time in the game, we're rewarded for swapping out one of our 10% rings for the status duration jewel so that he's still ticking corrosion damage during these idle phases in the sky. I also dipped my toes in the world of short-lived consumables for this fight. Because it takes so much iframe dodging, I bought a small stack of Ambit Ember to buff my evades, which I would pop whenever he flew out of range. I do give thanks that his only affix is Regenerator, which is totally fine. Elemental Resist would have been quite a bummer. Phase 1 is just timing rolls well and farting as we cross paths. He has one move where he spawns many red orbs, which will zoom at us for lethal damage if we don't destroy them quickly. The good news is, they are trivialized by a single well-placed fart. There's not much time to fart twice, so I found it more valuable to take my time and center myself well to make sure I get them all in one. Sadly, a bit of panic rolling gets me dead to his melee attacks on our first attempt. Our second attempt, we make it to Phase 2 by just playing clean all the way through Phase 1. The moveset gets crazy here, though I'm actually okay with it. The one thing I never did though is fight him up close, and I accidentally jumped to death, trying to close the distance for farts. Okay, third try. We make it to Phase 2 again, not much trouble. I know what to do. You dodge toward the cleaver when you hear it go swing, you duck the crossbars, and you blast his weak spot when he... Excuse me? Buddy. Hey. So after putting you through hell for a while, the boss enters a vulnerable state and lets you get a few easy attacks in. Except, he never exited this phase for me. My guess is this phase is probably scripted to allow you to attack him once or twice, and the thing is, I have no intention of attacking. He entered this phase at 85% health, then literally sat here and let me press triangle in front of his face every 3 seconds as long as I wanted. Around 75%, I start to wonder if this phase might last until I've dealt a certain amount of damage. Then around 65%, I'm pretty sure I've discovered secret final boss tech. The boss literally sat here and let me press triangle in front of his face every 3 seconds for 5+ minutes straight while he suffocated in gas. I did not want to swap back to a more damaging ring. I didn't want to move. I didn't even want to risk moving my camera in case I changed something here. Obviously, this warrants a patch, but hey, I'm not going to say no to this gravy train. We nail the final boss on our third try thanks to a major AI exploit. There's a very quick final part, and then the run is complete. Remnant 2 beaten entirely by a toxic release valve. This run was amazingly fun. Toxic release valve was clearly not intended to be somebody's sole source of damage, but it actually worked out quite well as such. For every aspect of the game that was made harder, like ranged enemies or elemental resist bosses, another aspect of the game was made easier, like getting to ignore any boss's adds, or tearing up those enemies who are very resistant everywhere but the weak spot. It started out as a meme, but it's clear this combination of survivability and crowd control, a toxic build is practically meta. Just imagine if I could actually shoot my guns too. That's it for this run. I enjoyed planning and executing this run quite a lot. If y'all enjoyed the Remnant 2 content, let me know with a comment or a like. I have quite a few more challenge run ideas in the bank for Remnant 2. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you later, alligator.